Hello friends, bienvenidos. My name is Jen, aka Jen Kahlo on social media, your local witchy friend and intuitive guide through the occult. As always, my lovely husband and co-host is David, aka Premier Pulls on social media.
Hey everyone, on today's episode, Jen explains spiritual scammers.
Welcome to the show, grab a chair, make yourself at home. Jen's got stories to share, you'll never feel alone.
Thank you everyone for listening. I'm very excited because we're using some new equipment, some new mics, some new headsets. Let us know what you think.
Also, bear with us because it is all brand new, and I am the one who edits and does everything, so I'm not an expert at this. So I'm still kind of learning myself, so if there are little choppy parts here and there, I do apologize in advance, but we'll get it down.
But now we are seeing like, oh, I want to try this equipment. I want to try this software. So actually, if you do want to support the podcast, that would be greatly appreciated. And it definitely will come back to the show.
Kind of. 80-20.
Oh my goodness. Well, if you're interested in donating for the energy exchange, you can find our donation link on Spotify. Or if you would rather not donate through Spotify, feel free to look at our link tree as well.
Awesome. And do I understand that we actually got our first donation?
Yes, thank you so much, Mercy, for the first donation to the podcast. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. You told me about it, and I was super happy to hear that. So, Mercy, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It also sounds like your Instagram might be growing here a little bit, huh?
Yeah, so I've always been floating like in the 900s, but I'm closer. I'm only 10 follows away from 1,000, and that's a pretty big milestone. So once I reach a solid 1,000, I definitely want to do a free reading giveaway of any kind, whether it's astrology, tarot, a mix, for about like 30 minutes once I reach 1,000 followers. So stay tuned for whenever that is.
Yeah, and we probably won't be announcing that too much on the podcast because that's Instagram is separate, but just make sure to, I used to do YouTube and I'm so used to saying please subscribe and like, but it's a different platform. So just make sure to follow Genesis on Instagram and kind of keep an eye out for that, for the giveaway.
Yes, at Jen Kahlo, GENKHLO.
Awesome.
And then finally, thank you to everyone who came to the Glamour Magic Workshop. That was so much fun. We had such a great time creating some beautiful products and just having a good old time at Abracadabra.
Yeah, and I don't think there was anything on the discussion post for that, but that's what we did last week. We talked about Glamour Magic. So tell us a little bit. Were you able to implement some of the stuff that we talked about? Were you able to kind of see that the workshop was going the way that you expected? Like, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we created, it's very interesting to create lip balm and solid perfume is the same process. So people got to choose whether they wanted to create lip balm or solid perfumes. And while you were mixing the wax, your mica powder, if you wanted it to be colored, and fragrance, if you wanted it to be fragranced, we encouraged everyone to speak their intention while they mixed, or if they wanted to call anyone in, like Aphrodite or any other spirit team that they wanted to invoke.
Are you willing to share kind of what your invocation was?
Yeah, so like we talked about last podcast, I want to move away from like shmoney, success, shmoney. That's been like my gig my whole life. And I want to now finally focus more on like being confident and like just feeling more comfortable with myself. So I did more of like a self-love spell for myself, obviously.
And I did get to see the result of the wonderful Glamour Magic. It was like a lip balm. It smelled really good. So whether it's charged or not, at least it has some pragmatic applications for sure.
Big shout out to Vanna for leading such a great class.
Excellent. So this week we are, I guess you could say, is our first like PSA, public service announcement type episode. We're going to be talking about spiritual scammers here. Format is going to be the same. Genesis is going to tell you a little bit about it. Then I'm going to talk about any experiences and then end with some questions. But if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. Just kind of a little recap of how things go here. Genesis explains a metaphysical topic to me, and then I, as a skeptic, listen, learn, but also question. And I think this episode is actually extremely important and one that I'm glad we're doing. Maybe one we probably should have done a little bit earlier, but things happen when they need to happen. And this one I think is very important because while you are a spiritual practitioner, I think that your ethics are good, balanced, and fair. And I don't think everybody has that, especially in a space where it's metaphysical, it's spiritual. There's objectively a little bit harder to quantify, what's real, what's not real. A lot of it is feeling, intuition. And so sometimes when there's more of a thin veil between objectivity and, I don't say fiction, but things that are not objective or based in reality, that can be tricky, right? You almost have to be a self-governing board and say, these are my ethics, this is what I believe, and this is the way I'm going to conduct myself within practices. And I think you did a wonderful job. That is one thing that, well, I don't think I, necessarily followed what you were doing metaphysically. I always understood and even asked you before, like, hey, babe, like, what are the ethics behind this? What do you feel the boundaries are, what they should be? So I think this is a very important episode. And again, if you're listening for the first time, this is going to be a good introduction of kind of like our thought process, because me as a skeptic, like, this is really big for me, right? This is where I'm like, okay, I put my foot down. It's an extent to understand and want to participate when there's no harm being done. But these are the topics and the conversations where I think it's really important to have them. And then at your end as a practitioner, I'm really excited just to kind of hear like your ethics and what you feel is right within this space. And we're also going to give kind of some examples of how to best, take care of yourself.
Yeah, I just want to clarify quickly. I wouldn't say that this is not rooted in reality, because it is. It's my reality and it's my client's reality. It's more like what you can't quantify with your eyes.
Correct. Yeah. And I couldn't find a good verb to describe it, but yes, it's quantifiable, I guess.
Yeah. And it's not like when you're a therapist and you have like HIPAA and you could report someone, or like if someone is a lawyer and you can report them to the bar, right? It's very much like you have to live your truth and your ethics, and those things, especially with all my Libra placements, is just kind of how I go. I can't betray myself. Like, I would just give myself the ick. Like, I very much care about my ethics as well as other people's ethics. Like, if someone else's ethics are kind of shaky, like, I can't really be around them. I can't be in their circle. Like,
yeah, and like I said, that's great, but this space is so self-governing, and it's a slippery slope. It is a very slippery slope when you're self-governing. As a matter of fact, I heard a recent example, and I don't have any validation to this, so it may be true, it may not be true, but a lot of those, especially with the Super Bowl just passing, there's a lot of like new apps and things that are coming up with like sports betting and things of that nature. And at the bottom, it always says, like, if you have an addiction or a problem with gambling, please call this number. Well, from my understanding, those entities are funded by the gambling corporations themselves, right? So it's like a self-governing body. Maybe they don't want to, but they have to. It's kind of like with the California lottery. Like, part of that money does need to go back into the community. So it was probably a stipulation, but they're self-governing in a way because they have to be. And I have heard, like, anecdotally, people who have called and they're just like, yeah, like, we'll find you resources. Like, it's very nonchalant. It's almost like it has to be a placeholder for there. So it just gets sketchy when it's self-governing.
yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about red flags and green flags in a minute, but yeah.
So tell us, what are spiritual scammers?
Yeah, so spiritual scammers are people that are really in spiritual work for the wrong reasons, or maybe they started with the right reasons and then they just lost their ethics along the way. With great power comes great responsibility. Or like, people will say like, when you were grassroots, you were so cool, and then like once you blew up, you sold out, right? Mm-hmm. So something like that can happen too. But honestly, mankind has been screwing each other over since the dawn of time with like anything and everything, and that includes spirituality. All belief systems are susceptible to spiritual scamming. So I'm not going to say like this spirituality or that spirituality is like more or less susceptible, because that's also one tenet I hold, is like no superiority anywhere. So yeah, no belief system is like superior or inferior to another. I mean, even like Martin Luther, if you take it back to like 10th grade history, who created this split between Catholicism and Protestantism, the reason why he did that was because he was so tired of the Catholic Church selling indulgences, which is basically like you pay to have your sins forgiven, and then the priest gives you the green light to go to heaven no matter what you do. You just got to pay your way out of it. So we have like that to like modern day scammers online, and with this sort of like new wave of spirituality in the information age, or should I say misinformation age, really, like when we can be so connected worldwide. Like it's such a double-edged sword. It's so beautiful and it's so scary at the same time.
100%. Yeah. And like you said, mankind has always been doing it, but it can grow so exponential just from, the information highway. So, yeah. So what type of different scams are out there right now?
I would say that scammers really fall into, I would say, 4 categories. I would say that there are the cult leaders, which are people that want power and money for themselves, to glorify themselves, for them to be like a god or in control to someone. And then there are the long and short-term financial scammers, which are a little bit different than cult leaders because they don't want the glory, they just want the cash. And short-term financial scammers are like, for example, they'll impersonate someone that is actually doing the work, maybe just like add an extra 1 or something to the username, and they tell someone like, oh yeah, it's $50 for a reading, and as soon as you pay $50 they just block you, but they just do that like over and over and over again, and like over time it is profitable to them. Long-term financial scammers maybe like will give you a couple good readings, and then all of a sudden they turn them dark and they're like, you're cursed, pay $50 more for me to sell you the cure. Like they'll really rope you in. It's like a long con. And then there are the apprentices or influencers that are just a little in over their heads. So there was someone that I took a chance on, that I was like so excited for them to give me a reading because they were really cool. And then they literally pulled out like the definition book in front of me. I was like, girl, are you like not ready? And also their rate was double mine. And I was just like, I'm not paying you to read definition. I mean, I still paid them for their time, but I was really salty, and I would never like recommend them again for myself or anyone else.
And I mean, that is a careful line, right? That's unprofessionalism versus probably spiritual scamming. I mean, because there's levels to it too, right? You can have good intention, but maybe your craft may not be the best. That's not, I wouldn't necessarily say that's scamming, but that's, when we'll talk about kind of like the green flags down the line, but that's something to look at if you want to get the best like bang for your buck, I guess is the best way to put it. One thing you did mention that I want to kind of touch on earlier is, and this goes in business too, is it's called scalability, right? There's the thought and process that you could be doing really, really great and you could be blowing up. But if you can't scale at the level where you're maintaining that service, your business, your practice, your spirituality is not going to succeed. And unfortunately, sometimes that is the downfall or the downside of success, right? You just grow too quickly, and at that point, it is very unfortunate. I think, again, I wouldn't necessarily call it scamming, but one thing is like, let's say you follow a very famous, so-and-so, and because they've gone so big, they have to scale. They can say like, well, unfortunately, like you can't schedule with me, but here's like schedule with my apprentice. This kind of happens with tattoo shops. Like if you go to, like they'll have like the main like super famous tattoo artist, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go to their shop, and you get a tattoo, and then when you go there, like they're unavailable, their prices are like super duper high, so you may maybe get it from like another artist, but you got through the door based on the name of like the main person.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And like time is a valuable thing. So let's say I wanted to pay Beyonce for a 30-minute lunch. She could charge me like $3,000 just to like eat with me, right? Like that is scalability. That is really like marketing your time, because the more like in demand you are, the more you can charge. The tea with this person is that they said that they knew more than they did. And that's where I was like, okay, that's not cool.
But again, do you think that's scam, or do you think that's just unprofessional? Because to me, it sounds like they were being unprofessional. They claimed to do something that I think it'd be one thing if they were like, you know, I'll take your money and then not even give you the reading, you know? So I think that's more of a scam, like you're the short term. It sounds like they gave you the service, but it wasn't the most professional way to give it to you, right?
Okay, what if you order something online and it looks super beautiful, and then you get it and it's like a piece of crap falling apart? You technically got something, but it wasn't as described.
Got it.
Would you feel like you were scammed?
I don't know if I would call it a scam. I think I would call it, like, if a service is unprofessional, if it's a product, I would say, like, that's on me. I should have researched it better. But yeah, I mean, I could see your point, though.
We'll agree to disagree here. I don't think we're gonna see eye to eye. It's getting into semantics. We'll move on. Then there are the more like the influencers that, like, you know, I don't know. And again, this may not be a scam, but it's just something I don't like, where like they'll promote a product and then like they don't even try it. They don't even know what they're promoting. They're just like, you know, I don't know. I just feel like if you want to promote something, you need to like know what it is. Like, I don't know.
Be genuine about it.
Yeah, I don't think that's a scam. I think that just gives me the ick.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then finally there are like the cold readers and the entertainers. So sort of like some big mediums that we see in Hollywood that, you know, I mentioned like a couple episodes ago, where like they have really good stage presence and they can like really read someone's body language and like rope them into the fantasy. But in the end, like, it's not real, right? Sort of like how someone might approach like an older woman in the audience and be like, you know, they're older, more than likely they've experienced at least one death, and being like, there's someone on the other side. Did you lose someone that you love? More than likely, if they're older in age, yes, they have. And then after that, you take a stab at it, like, are they a female presence? You have a 50-50 shot at that point, right? And then after that, if they're like, no, actually they're a male presence, it's like, oh, then maybe they were really effeminate, or maybe they were really caring, you know, like you rope them into the fantasy that way.
Yeah, I think that's very, you know, with especially with the superstars, let's say, and what's sad is kind of, we keep going back to that, is like they probably started with good intentions and they started doing it, you know, with well-meaning, but then they just blew up and got lost in the sauce, like they say. I think a good example of somebody who probably did it right, and we've brought this up in the past, is like Walter Mercado, right? You know, they got big and it sounds like they stayed true to themselves, which is wonderful to see. You were mentioning like kind of how they do it. Part of it is just asking the leading questions, and I think that's already right there a good sign, right? If you're talking to somebody and they're asking a lot of like leading questions, that is probably a sign that they are trying to mine information or kind of socially engineer you to give the information that they're looking for.
And not to say that like you should go to a reader and be like, just guess, you know, because then it's like they're going to pick up on another part of your life and you're like, oh, damn, I wanted them to talk about my career and instead they gave me a love reading, or vice versa, right? And there are some cards that can have double meaning. So like I've been getting a lot of love readings recently, and the only thing I do have to ask is like, what are they to you? Because like I could get a card and it means something else if you're like in a long-term relationship versus if they're a crush. But yeah, if they're asking too many questions, you're right, that could be a red flag.
And then I think the biggest one is, like you said, is the paywall, as they call it, right? Pay to play. If they're like, well, I gave you the first reading, in order to unlock the second one, you got to pay. That's a big thing to look out for. Or the, you know, sign up for XYZ, sign up for my course, sign up for this, in order for you to get like a specific question that you need to answer. Now, if you're promoting like a workshop or you're promoting something like that where it's open to everybody, the product is the same for everyone and it's not tailored, then that's one thing. But if, you know, you hear like, well, I see here some immediate, death in your family. And unfortunately, the only way you're going to be able to find out who I'm talking about is if you sign up for my course. That's where the scamming is taking place.
Or like a second reading or something, right? A big scam that's going around is they'll message someone and be like, I just got such an important message for you. Like, I need to tell you, will you buy a reading? Sometimes
Yes.
I'll get messages for people and I can't control it. For the most part, I don't get unsolicited information like that, but every once in a while I do. And when I do, and I'm just like, oh shit, like I know some stuff about someone and they didn't even ask me, I will tell them like, hey, someone on your spirit team like gave me a message for you. Do you want to hear it? And if they're like, nah, then no. But if they're like, yes, I'm not going to be like, well, pay me.
Yeah, and you never charge them. That's
No, at that point, it's like, I just have to give this to you.
And as a matter of fact, you talked about this earlier. I think episode 2, actually, where you started getting visions, premonitions of you need to buy this person a candle, and you bought the candle for them. So you actually paid to give them the message. And I think that's a good indicator, right, of like, you're just a vessel, you're just a messenger. And, if you ever did say at any point, like, I have a message for you, but you got to pay me, then that's where you'll have issues. Another thing kind of relating to ethics, and this is something I think I helped you with. Correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of when you were not starting out, but, kind of learning your practice, I think there was times where you would get maybe not great messages in your readings or great information or things that might be like, you don't, just as a human, you don't really want to tell another human this. But I think I remember telling you, like, listen, it's not your place to gatekeep the information. It's not your place to filter the information. If somebody's coming to you and asking you, you kind of have to tell them whatever the cards say, whatever the reading says, and then let them make the determination of what they do with that information. Because I don't think you ever necessarily like maybe filtered or omitted, but you were very wary of maybe really sharing what it was.
Yeah. So this was like one of the first times that I got death, and it was that 1% where it actually meant dying. And I didn't want to tell the person that someone around them was like not going to make it past 3 months. And normally that's like really not my responsibility. And I really try not to do that. But this person was family. They were close enough to where I could tell them something like that. And yeah, even that person called me out and they're like, no, say it, say what it is. So
Correct.
yeah, you don't want to give bad news, but yeah, sometimes you have to, but there's a way you can give bad news without being like totally destructive.
Correct, right. And there's ways to it, but it's just like I think it's unethical for you to gatekeep information.
Yeah. I learned that real quick, essentially after that. So yeah, I think it's like if they're always like, yeah, you're going to be a billionaire tomorrow, or like, if it's too positive or if it's too negative, like at that point, it's like they're yanking your chain one way or the other.
All right. And then lastly, one of the biggest ones to me is, unfortunately, a lot of scammers do prey on hope. And hope comes in a lot of ways. If you're sick or someone you know is sick, or you're financially struggling and you're just trying to get reassurance in your life, you're just trying to get a positive message, you're just trying to hear somebody tell you it's going to be okay. It is sad, but we are in a world where people will take advantage of that. So, if you're suffering from a chronic illness, if you're suffering from a real medical condition, I would just say carte blanche, like, don't ever just go to a non-medical professional. I think it's okay to do both, right? I think spiritual healing helps in the physical healing, but don't just rely on non-verified medical support. And that's kind of what sucks, right? I mean, sometimes there's just no answers, and people go to the doctor and say, unfortunately, like, medically, we're at the end of the road, and people get desperate and they go here and they go there, and that's where I think if anybody has any takeaway from this episode, it's to be very mindful of that. When you're at your most vulnerable and the only thing you have is hope, be careful where you put that hope in.
Yes, it's really sad that people do that, but yeah, they will. Just and also I think a red flag or a green flag of a practitioner would be if they know their limits. Like, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. Like in astrology, there are ways to like calculate windows of death, but if someone asked me to read that, I would be like, absolutely fucking not. That is not something that like I feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to say that it's not okay to reach out to your metaphysical or your spirituality for that support, but just don't put all your hopes into it. And then especially if they're like, you need to pay me.
And it's different from paying for someone's time, right? Like, just because someone is asking for like payment for a service doesn't mean they're scamming you, but you know, it's the extreme. Like, they'll give you half the reading and then they'll be like, oh, you got to pay me more, something like that.
Or they have, going back to our apothecary saying like, oh, I have this cure that like, anything that's like a cure-all, be very mindful of.
Yeah. And I've just been getting really passionate about this topic, as people can probably like tell from my voice, just because like very recently I've had to pull my friends from some scams. It's just been coming up and I'm just like, wow, I did not expect so many people recently to like fall prey to stuff. There's a Netflix documentary, and I'm not going to name the name of it because I'm legitimately scared of these people, but there is like an ongoing cult that has not been able to be taken down. They're still active, they're still up and running. It's really hard to take down a cult legally. You have to find a crime to pin them with. And I looked them up just out of curiosity, and I saw that one of my friends followed that cult. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I called her and I was like, do you know that they're like a legitimate cult? Like, please watch this documentary. And luckily they weren't too lost in the sauce where they were able to be like, oh, let me unfollow that. But yeah, it's really quick. It's a slippery slope. It's really scary.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, anything more on the subject as far as... Oh, actually, no, we haven't talked about green flags. So what are some green flags? Let's not end on a somber note. So what are some things to look out for some positive people in the spiritual community?
Yeah, that they're willing to discuss their education and experience without getting offended. So if you're like, you know what, I really want a reading with you, but I just want to make sure that like, you know your stuff, or maybe you know it in the way that I need it. Like, I know how to calculate astrology using the house system of Placidus. I don't know how to calculate it with Vedic. Yeah, so something like that, for example. Like, I don't know the Vedic system. So they're willing to discuss their education and experience without offense, and then talk about what they can and can't do. No pressure to book, rebook, or just keep paying. And then also, just if you know someone that has been to them and had a great experience, like, there's nothing like word of mouth.
Word of mouth, yeah. Good. I think those are some really good signs. And I think it's a good take from you. I think a good take from me as somebody who is a skeptic, and if it wasn't for you, I definitely would never seek any of these things out. But from an outside perspective, looking in on somebody who's not really a believer or a practitioner, it's all about intention, right? I mean, even with therapy, when you find a therapist, like I used to tell my clients, therapists are like shoes. They need to fit well, or else you're going to be uncomfortable. And that's the approach I would take. What sucks, though, side note, sometimes your health insurance doesn't allow you to look around or shop around. But if you have the ability to find like a therapist that vibes with you and understands your needs and specializes in what you're going through, that's really, really important. It's very rare. I mean, maybe not very rare, but it's not uncommon to go to your first therapy session and that just not be the therapist that vibes with you. They might be a great therapist. They might have great practice. They're obviously licensed, but people are unique. People are different. And that's kind of the approach I would take, is like, if I was trying to find like a therapist, I would definitely try to find somebody who aligns with the needs that I need filled and the issues that I need help with, and then that they specialize in that. So again, as somebody who's not in the practice, if I were looking for a spiritual or metaphysical person, that's how I would go about it.
Yeah, that's a good point because there are different people with different styles, right? And someone may know their stuff, but they just deliver it in a way that you really don't like. Like, I know some tarot readers that do like phone calls, and I'm like, if I want a tarot reading, like, or maybe not so much anymore, but in the beginning when I didn't know what the cards look like I wanted to see them, you know?
Yeah.
Now that I know what the cards look like, I guess I could do a phone call and be happy with it. But yeah, or like sometimes people like are just really loud and bubbly, and sometimes I'm like, I just want like a chill introspective session. And again, nothing against like certain types of people, but it's all about style. And you know, I'm sure someone wouldn't get offended if you just like, or anyone that's like worth their salt wouldn't get offended if you like go once and you're like, you know, this was cool and I appreciate your time and I'll pay for your time, but like it wasn't my style. But
Correct. And that's one of the green flags that you said. Like, somebody who doesn't get offended at that is a green flag, right? It's somebody's like, okay, they understand that the product is not for everybody and they can move on with harmony.
oh, another green flag that I just thought of, people also knowing their limits, like when they have to cancel. Like if I'm not in a good physical, emotional state of mind, I can't do good readings. Let's say like work was really stressful and I had to work overtime, or like I'm feeling sick or something, then I'll tell someone like, you know what, I am so sorry. I am physically not feeling well. So, you know, let's reschedule for another time. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, now maybe kind of some personal examples. I have one. I personally haven't been like, it didn't affect me, but I can kind of go back and share. When I was growing up, at my house, we didn't have cable. At my grandma's, we did. So I can't say I didn't grow up without cable because I did watch cable growing up. I don't want to make it seem like I never had access to that. But when I was like growing up at my house, we didn't always have cable and we only had access to, well, shit, back then was antennas. So whatever fucking the antenna
Dish.
was. Yeah. There was a specific channel that would only come on certain times. So like if the weather allowed it, basically. It wasn't even a dish, it's an antenna. It's a dish you pay for. But antennas are like, you literally plug it in and they're called the bunny ears, basically.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But there was a Spanish network called TV Azteca, and I think it's based out of Mexico. But I just remember that channel I would either get sometimes or wouldn't get sometimes. And like late at night, they would have like more creepy things going on. And one of the things that I used to think was like, I was like, oh my gosh, like how do they do it? Like this, obviously it's real, is I don't know if it's practiced like worldwide, but I know in like Latino culture, specifically in Mexican culture, they have like this thing where if you have like some sort of ailment, they'll like lay you down and then the practitioner will like, it looks like they're putting their hands like inside of your body. So like they'll put their hands on your stomach and then like kind of start squishing around, and it looks like they're going in, and then all of a sudden like blood starts coming out, and they'll pull out like masses, and then like they'll wipe down the stomach and there's like no incision and no scar. So it's like, oh, I magically went inside and took something out. Little do I, well, so when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, like you can't fake that. Like you can see it right there. But really what it is they have like chicken livers or something like palmed in their hand. And then when they go in, they spread it all over and it looks like they went and did spiritual surgery. I've seen a lot of that. And I was always not fascinated, but when I was younger, I was like, well, it's got to be real. Like, how is it not real, you know? And then they would like throw it in something and it's just like nasty. So you were led to believe that they took something out of you, whether it's like a spirit. I don't know. I think there's different ones. Like one is like, it could be like bad energy. Another could be just like masses or whatever. But that's the one thing that resonated. And when I was like, what am I going to talk about in this episode? That's the one example that I had was, and I wish I knew the name. It has a name.
It's called psychic surgery.
Is it?
And I totally forgot that scam still happens, but just not in the US. But in other countries where, like, you know, surgeries and stuff are like less regulated, or there's like less punishment for cutting people open, psychic surgeries still happen. And the fucked up part is sometimes they will actually cut people open, take out a mass, sew them back up, and, like, you know, they could get infections, they can get like all sorts of nasty stuff, and then they show the person like, look, I cured you, like, look, I took this out. So sometimes it's like putting them under and making them think like I actually cut you open, and sometimes actually cutting them open.
Wow. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, well, spoiler, I guess. So if you don't want to listen to a spoiler, the newest Saw movie had that, right? Where supposedly they went in and took something out, but they actually did it. So that was just kind of fresh in my mind. So when I think about scams, that's where I go. It's like, and it's entertaining, but also like I mentioned earlier, like hope is such a double-edged sword, right? Because you want to have hope. You want to have the idea that things are going to be okay, but when they prey on that, you're also just so freaking vulnerable, and it sucks.
Speaking of psychic surgery, so the difference between that and like medical scamming is like, I'm a doctor and I know what I'm doing, versus like psychic surgery is like your spirit guides are telling me that you have something in the upper right quadrant of your abdomen or whatever. So it's like how they sell it to you. So psychic surgery is more like, oh, don't worry, I'm not a doctor, but the guides will take me to the right place.
Trust me.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, did you have anything or not? We do have a couple questions.
I've run into so many. I could go on a tangent. I feel like I talked about a lot of them. So we'll just go into the questions.
Perfect. All right. And this week's questions are by Mercy. I think Mercy's running up to be our number one fan. However, we do have some ghost listeners. There'll be times where some of our friends will be like, oh, like, I really appreciated that episode, but they never post on Instagram or anything. And I'm like, oh, shit, you listen to our podcast? You're like, yeah, religiously. And I'm like, oh, cool. Kind of on that note, I had the other day, we went to a public event or whatever, and there were some people you know, and I was just being cordial, and I told the person, I was like, oh, hey, you know, my name's David, nice to meet you. And they're like, oh, I know who you are. And I was like, whoa. They were like, I recognize your voice. And again, you and I are just having a conversation, but it's really cool when you talk to people like, oh shit, like, I've listened to you. So anyways, I digress. Mercy says, are there any particular practices or belief systems that are more susceptible to exploitation by scammers? So I would say, like, unfortunately, if you're already in the spirit, like if you're already a believer, or you've already been convinced that there's like spirituality, all these things, you may be more susceptible because your foot's already in the door, right? So it takes like objectivity, even when you're practicing, even when you are like with you, you're a perfect example. Like, what's the thing you always say? Like, always explore the mundane before
metaphysical. Yes. Yeah.
So if you're like in the really, really deep end where you've gone past that, like, no, everything has this, like, you don't question things, then I think you could be a little more susceptible.
So I just want to caveat this. The spiritual scam that you're most vulnerable to is the scams within your community. If someone were to come to me and say, like, I don't know, I have the ticket to go see Jesus, I'm like, that, I don't really care about that, you know? Or like, I don't know, oh, follow me and I'll get you in touch with Anubis. I'd be like, cool story, bro. Like, I don't really care about that, you know? So you, and not like you specifically, but just like the general you, like, you're most susceptible to scams of the spirituality that you already follow.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you put it in a way better way than I was trying to explain. All right, Mercy, second question. Are there any common techniques that spiritual scammers use to manipulate or deceive their followers? Yeah, it's the pay me for more. I think that's the bigger one, right? It's I have the answers. Oh, that's something we didn't touch on. Another huge red flag, and I know you're very passionate about this, is people who claim that they are the vessel and like there is no one else, right?
Oh yeah, like they're the one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Big, like I am the Messiah, I am the second coming, or I am your only way to the Akashic records or whatever the fuck they want to say.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Heck no.
So anytime you hear that, like, I'm the only one who has this information or I'm the only one that can do this, run. Right?
Or if someone is gatekeeping like their education, like I have a friend who I did a reading for them and they were like, that's cool, but I want to study it for myself. What resources do you have? And I was like, yeah, if you want to study by yourself, do XYZ.
Yeah. Perfect. And then lastly, can you discuss any notable cases or scandals involving spiritual scammers on Aftermath? Yes. So Inside Edition did a really cool undercover like operation. Their shit is a little cheesy, I will say, but they had a good one. I think if you just look it up, it's like Inside Edition spiritual scam. The host went to supposedly a psychic that helps solve like unsolved murders or unsolved cold cases. And she showed her a picture of herself as a little girl. And she told the psychic, like, can you tell me about this little girl? And the psychic said, yes, I'm getting a reading from the other side that this girl died a very tragic and painful death and whatever. And then she was like, well, what would you say if I told you that that little girl is me? And then she obviously, I think, made 1,000,001 excuses as to why not. So that's a really good one. If you kind of want to see what it looks like through like a scammy way, just look like, I think it's on YouTube. Look it up, Inside Edition. I think that's a really good, notable one.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of like what's been on my mind recently are like the cults. So some cults will like draw people in and like, oh, you have a family now, like especially lonely people that are like, I've never felt understood, like very vulnerable. And then you get that paywall, like pay to keep having access to me. And eventually they'll traffic people and be like, work for the church for free or whatever the, belief system is, like make my content, work at the services, and then eventually like move into this compound with me. And then they just have like total control and like living slaves. It's like really crazy. Those are extreme ones though.
So on that note, if you want to keep listening to the podcast, you will have to pay us too.
No.
I'm just kidding. But yeah, I think that's all we have. If you are a new listener, again, welcome. I think this is actually a good one to start listening if you haven't listened to. So thank you everybody for everyone's support so far. We really appreciate it. Like I said last episode, it looks like we're picking up. We're getting some momentum and I want to keep this thing going.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's like the emotional fulfillment and passion for us. Yeah, we're not necessarily in this to like get rich. We're in this to have.
Oh, speak for yourself. She does not speak for me.
Well, I'm in it to have cool, honest conversations with my friends listening in every Wednesday.
Me too. All right, everybody. Have a great day.
Remember, the magic within you makes the world a more beautiful place. Blessed be in signing off.